So let's talk about Ephesians chapter 5. The next passage we can look at is Ephesians chapter 5, verses 20. We can start again in 21, but the section is 22 to chapter 6, verse 9. So the 21 sort of acts as a head, because he says in verse 21, be subject to one another in the fear of Messiah. That's sort of like, be subject to one another is what he's saying. Okay, what does that look like? Now he's going to break it down into 3 sections. Wives and husbands, children and parents, and slaves and masters. It's interesting that he puts in that society wives, children, and slaves. He puts them first, in each one. Yeah. Why? Because wives, children, and slaves, they were at a disadvantage in society. In this society, even in our society too, but certainly in Paul's day. Wives were not treated with respect, children were not treated with respect, and slaves certainly were not treated with respect. So what does he say? First, he gives dignity to each one because he gives them a choice. He says, wives, submit to your husband, right? As to the Lord, as to Jesus. If he thought that wives should just do whatever their husband said, then he wouldn't give them a choice.
That's right.
So he gives wives a choice. Right? Mm-hmm. Be subject to your husbands as to the Lord. As to the Lord is the key. We're in verse 22, right?
Yeah.
It's not be subject to your husbands because they're your husband, but because you would submit to Jesus anyway, right? Even if you were single or if you're married, you're going to submit to what Jesus would have you do anyway. So the only things that you're supposed to submit to your husband in are things that you would submit to Jesus.
That's right.
Those things that you would be submissive towards Jesus, right? And so, like, if your husband asks you to sin, well, you're not supposed to be submissive to that.
No.
So I do believe that Paul is not making a totally emphatic statement saying that the husband-wife relationship needs to be husband on top, wife over here. It makes more sense to me to understand that he's looking at his culture and he's saying, wives are down here, so I'm going to bring them up over here and say, submit to your husbands as you would to Jesus. And what does he say to husbands? Lord over your wives. No, he doesn't say Lord over your wives. He says, love them with a sacrificial love. So he doesn't give husbands the authority to do whatever they want.
No.
He says to the wives, be submissive, but the husbands can't do whatever they want. They have to love their wives.
That's right.
So it makes a nice mutual relationship.
Otherwise, it's hard for her to.
Of course, yeah. So
to be submit.
Right, and the wife should only submit, so to speak, to use that language.
If it's a love.
If it's in sacrificial love, exactly. If it's not in sacrificial love, well then it's not necessary to submit to that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so he makes that contrast, or rather, so he makes that analogy that he illustrates that the husband-wife relationship, the wife-husband relationship, is similar to the church, so to speak, God's assembly, and the Messiah.
Yeah,
right?
that's
the illustration. The same way that Jesus dies for us and loves us, but we submit to Him. That's the way a wife and a husband should interact.
That's the picture, yes.
And so it's not because I don't picture, and I guess it all depends on your picture of Jesus. I don't think of Jesus as someone who's angry with us, who wants us to do whatever He says. I think He has our best interest at heart, and so we're going to have a reciprocal relationship. And so, very quickly, we can go, it's the same sort of thing with children, verse 6, or chapter 6, verse 1. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. In the Lord. In other words, whatever your parents ask of you, that God would also, or rather, I think he's talking about Jesus, but whatever, Jesus is God's representative. So whatever that God would ask of you to do, that's what you do. And so when your parents ask you to do something, you submit to them as you would to God. However, what this means is that the parents can't ask anything of their children. It has to be only the things that God would ask.
You have to be good.
It has to be good things. And so this is why he says in verse 4, fathers, or I think he means parents in general, but he's talking about fathers specifically, do not provoke your children to anger. Your job is not to provoke them to anger.
Yes.
If you do, then you're missing the point.
If you command your children to go steal,
Yeah.
of course you have to say, no, I don't go.
So, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but what are they supposed to do? Bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Which doesn't mean you get to treat them however you want.
Yeah.
It means however God treats us, that's the way you should treat your children.
That's right.
So there's a lot of freedom there, because God gives us freedom, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, and so finally, slaves, be obedient to those who are your masters. Now, we believe slavery is wrong. I think that we can make the case that the Bible teaches that we shouldn't have slavery.
Mm-hmm.
All right, but what does the Bible do? Does it abolish it altogether? It doesn't. And I'm not saying that's a good thing. But I do think that the people in the Bible were working within the culture that they lived in. So Paul, I think, is working within the culture that he lived in and was saying, look, you're a slave, that's your situation. I would think that if you could be freed, that Paul would be good with that. But if not, you have to work within the situation that you're in. If you're a slave, you don't have a choice.
Right. But even when you become a Christian and you are a slave, now just because you heard about you are free, now you are in Christ, you are free.
Right.
Don't be rebellious to your boss.
Okay.
Because you are free in the spirit, but your body still is submit to the boss. Because you live in his house and you work for him and you have no other choice until you get free completely.
Okay, so the key being until you can have the opportunity to be free, because Paul and Jesus certainly don't advocate violence.
Yeah.
They don't advocate violence, so how can you get free? Well, you can't unless somehow there's an agreement that you can be free. So while you're in that situation, obey your master as you would Jesus.
That's right.
But here's the revolutionary part. The revolutionary part that Paul has here. He says in verse 9, "Masters, do the same things to them." Wow. Masters should treat their slaves as if they were partners, as if the slave was a genuine human being.
Yeah.
So he's not letting masters off the hook here. He's saying, look, just because you have that relationship doesn't mean you can treat them however you want. You need to treat them like he's a brother.
That's right.
And why is that? Because in verse 9, knowing that both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no partiality with him. God doesn't make a distinction to say that you're a slave and you're free. You're the master. He doesn't do that. He sees us as equals. Right? So just because you want to hold on to that system doesn't mean that God does. For more videos, click on the subscribe link below or visit youtube.com/Messianic Niagara. Please like us on Facebook, facebook.com/Messianic Niagara. You can follow us on Twitter, twitter.com/Messianic Niag. You can email us at contact@messianicniagara.com. And please visit our website at messianicniagara.com.